What I would like to say is this is an event that really is in honor of Tony. Tony has a new book out, If Words Could Save Us, from Norma Press. It's wonderful. I'll have the good fortune of getting to review it for the Asheville Poetry Review this year. So this is the reason we're having the reading. But Tony was nice enough to ask me, as his longtime friend, to come and read with him. I thought I was going to be the opening act, and Tony would be the headliner, but he wants to go first. So here we go. He's a hard act to follow, so you'll see. You'll see very soon. Tony is Professor Emeritus at Davidson College, and he served as department chair from 1989 to 1996. He received his A.B. from Princeton and his M.A. and Ph.D. from Harvard. Tony has published 6 books of poetry, including the Pulitzer Prize-nominated The Girl in the Yellow Raincoat. We are here tonight to celebrate the launch of this new book, and tonight is his night as a poet. We're here to celebrate him as a poet, but Tony is so much more than a poet. Tony is a novelist. He has his first novel, Leaving Maggie Hope, won the prestigious Novella Literary Award and the Forward Magazine's Gold Award for Literary Fiction. Isn't it great to have literary fiction? Its sequel, The Three Great Secret Things, was published in 2007. Tony is also an editor. In 2011, he edited the anthology What Writers Do, which is a collection of essays, short stories, and poems by distinguished alumni at the Lenore Ryan University Visiting Writers Series. He's also a great teacher. He was my first mentor as a poet. If you check the register of poets who've moved on and continued with their poetry, a huge number of them will have studied at the feet of Tony Abbott. For a while, there was a group of us females that called ourselves Tony's Poets because he had taught us so much. A lot of the poems you will hear later were written under his guidance, and I have a voice, it's the Tony voice inside my head. Those of you who have me in class know that Tony is sort of an oracle. I will say, well, as Tony Abbott says, well, as Tony Abbott says. I had a friend who came over from Wales, and Tony was actually out of the country, and she said, where's this Tony Abbott that you always talk about? And so he's a generous teacher. He's wonderful to individuals, but on a statewide scale also. He's also a friend. He is someone who is generous to individual friends. There have been times when I've had crises in my life that I've called them literary crises, where I've gotten a weird review in the Salisbury Post for a play. Tony writes back. I have a crisis in my family. Tony comes over and talks to me. Tony has been a great friend to me, but Tony has also been a great friend to the writers of North Carolina. Not only with his time, but with his resources. He has done so much of interest and weight to this community that he was awarded the prestigious Sam Reagan Award for his writing and for his service to the literary community of North Carolina. Late-breaking news. Tony is a creative nonfiction writer. In fact, he has just won top honors in the 2012 Rose Post Creative Nonfiction Competition for his essay, The White Dress. Many of us, I have known Rose for a good new Rose, who is no longer, she died this year, and it's only appropriate that Tony would be here. And knowing Rose as I do, she would have been delighted with him and delighted with his essay. It's an essay about a visit to Emily Dickinson's house, and the judge, who is author Anne Kleiner Barnhill, said this. She concludes her remarks saying, the writer's passion for this event was palpable. Whether it's in regard to his teaching, or his poetry, or scholarship, or his fiction, or his directing of plays, or his friendships, Tony Abbott's passion is always palpable. Please help me welcome Tony Abbott.
My goodness. I don't feel quite real, you know, it's like, who is this person? You all know Janice, and you know how wonderful she is and how much she has meant to this college, so it's very appropriate that we should be here reading together because we both care deeply for each other. We both care deeply for the art which we practice, and we both care deeply for teaching. So there you go. I'm going to recite most of these poems. And the reason I'm going to do that is that for me, the poem has much more power if I'm trying to bring it up out of my unconscious rather than just off the page. I may make mistakes, but you won't know it if I'm able to cover it up. But I love reciting because I feel like I'm feeling the poem, and the poem isn't just what I'm reading. There's a difference, and so this is something that I love doing. And I asked Janice if I could go first because if you recite, what would happen is while Janice was reading, I'd be saying my poems to myself. And I'd rather say my poems to you and then be able to really pay attention to Janice, because once I'm done, then I can kind of breathe and relax and give her my full attention. I want to start with a poem by a poet named Marie Howe. How many of you know Marie Howe? Wow, good. She's a wonderful, wonderful poet. And the reason I start with a poem by somebody else is because the great Dana Goya, who became head of the National Endowment for the Arts, said that when poets give readings, we should honor the art of poetry, not just our own poetry. And so we should always, at a reading, read at least one poem by somebody other than ourselves. And I try to honor that by always doing that. And since I get to go first, then I can do that first, and then I've done it. This is a very great poem. She will be here next year as in the fall as part of the Lenore Ryan Visiting Writers Series, Marie Howe. And this is the title poem from her book, What the Living Do. This book is dedicated to the memory of her brother Johnny, who died of AIDS. Johnny, the kitchen sink's been clogged for days. The Drano won't work, but it smells dangerous. And the crusty dishes have piled up, waiting for the plumber I still haven't called. This is that every day we spoke of. It's winter again, and the sky's a deep, headlong blue, and the sun is pouring through the open living room windows because the heat's on too high and I can't turn it off. For weeks now, driving, dropping a bag of groceries in the street, the bag breaking, I've been thinking, this is what the living do. Yesterday, hurrying down the wobbly bricks in the Cambridge sidewalk, spilling my coffee down my wrist and sleeve, I thought it again and again when buying a hairbrush. This is it. Parking, slamming the car door shut against the cold. This is that yearning you spoke of, that yearning you finally gave up. We want the spring to come and winter to pass. We want whoever to call or not to call, a letter, a kiss. We want more and more and more and still more of it. But there are moments, walking, catching a glimpse of myself in the window glass, say, the window of the corner video store, that I am gripped with a cherishing so deep of my own chapped face, blowing hair, and unbuttoned overcoat, that I am speechless. I am living. I remember you. I have to breathe. Very great poem. So you need something that's a little lighter. So this is both light and heavy at the same time. I'm going to start with a poem of mine called Carrot-Colored Words. Every student who's ever been in Janice's poetry class knows this poem. So I honor all of you by reciting it to you. Remember, as you listen to this poem, that it's got some odd things in it you've got to pay close attention to. Sometimes I stop and read a line again because people are supposed to laugh, and if they don't laugh, then I read it again because I think I missed something. So I'm going to be watching you. See, I don't have to look at the text. Carrot-colored words. The dialogue goes something like this. I love you, I say, it being the end of our conversation. I love you, you reply weakly after long silence. I challenge your desultory reply. It's the word, you say. It's been overused. We have to find a better. For nights I search for carrot-colored words. For words with purple tails and horns and long red sashes round their middles. I search for words with yellow spotted stomachs. A doctor friend tells me how patients miss medical terms. A woman in Georgia speaks of suffering from smiling mighty Jesus, meaning spinal meningitis. Good, you got it. Another has fireballs of the Eucharist. In reality, fibroids of the uterus. If I could choose, I'd take Jesus too, and those fireballs be fibroids all to hell. I fireball you. I smiling mighty Jesus you. It's cute and satisfies your need for something new, but it's not exactly what I meant to say. What I meant to say is, if I were dying, and I could choose one person in the world to sit and hold my hand and hear whatever words I had to say, it would be you. And I know no better term for that than love. If I find one, I'll let you know. So, I was born in San Francisco in 1935. I went east with my mother on the train, and my mother remarried. I grew up in New York City and Connecticut, and my family broke up when I was 9 years old, and I was sent off to boarding school, and I would come down to New York for vacations, and my home was with my married sister and her 2 children who lived in the Bronx. And on my 21st birthday, they left, moved to California. And I had no home address. I was a junior at Princeton. And you know, when you had to fill out those forms and you put home address, I didn't know what to put because I knew once they moved to LA, I wasn't going to use that as my home address. So I just didn't have one. And many years later, in my new book, If Words Could Save Us, I wrote this poem on that day. It was on my 21st birthday that they moved to California. This poem's called a pantoum. How many of you know what a pantoum is? I think I better tell you. Now, because this is good, you've got to pay attention. This is really good. A pantoum is a poem with a 4-line stanza. And the second and fourth lines of the first stanza become the first and third lines of the second stanza. Follow me? And then the second and fourth lines of the second stanza become the first and third lines of the third stanza, and so on and so on and so on until you get to the end where you do the first and third lines of the first stanza in reverse, and you end up with the line that you began with. Now, if I get this mixed up, it'll be a terrible disaster because I have to always remember which are the 2 lines that get repeated. So I'm going to concentrate very hard. This is the story of what happened on my 21st birthday. And remember, in the pantoum, all the lines are discrete. They have to be complete in themselves because each line has to be carried over. So listen for the 4 lines. On the morning of my 21st birthday, my sister moved to California. Suitcases, boxes tied to the roof. She waved goodbye and vanished. Got it? My sister moved to California, taking with her the only home I'd known. She waved goodbye and vanished. In the back seat, the children read comics. She took away the only home I'd known. In my city, snow graying on the dirty streets. In the back seat, the children read comics. In their old apartment, dust and the flicker of grease. In my city, snow graying on the dirty streets, nowhere to go, nothing to be done. In their old apartment, dust and the flicker of grease. Where do you live, my friends at college ask. Nowhere to go, nothing to be done except take the train back to school. Where do you live, my friends at college ask. In the regions of the mind, in my shuttered heart. I take the train back to school, closing my old overcoat around my neck. In the regions of the mind and my shuttered heart, I look for the star that played at Bethlehem. I close my old coat around my neck and climb the 60 stairs to my tower room. I look for the star that played at Bethlehem and kneel in silence by my narrow bed. Nothing there but the spinning of wheels. She waved goodbye and vanished, flicked her cigarette out the window on the morning of my 21st birthday. Now, how long can I keep doing this? So, I came to Davidson College as a teacher. Went to Princeton, went to Harvard, got my PhD, came to Davidson. I had a wife and 3 children. And in 1967, my 3rd year at Davidson, my young daughter died very suddenly with no explanation, no sickness. She died of encephalitis. And it took me 10 years, literally 10 years, to find the words to talk about how I felt. And I think I became a poet in order to find those words, in order to find the words for grief, the words for love, the words for loss, the words for hope. And in 1981, when she would have been 18 years old and a freshman at Davidson College perhaps, I had a girl in one of my classes who wore a yellow raincoat. And I thought, well, she was a wonderful, wonderful girl, and I thought, this is the kind of girl I would want my daughter to be. And so I wrote this poem for her called The Girl in the Yellow Raincoat, which is the title poem from my first book, published in 1989. The girl in the yellow raincoat waits on the sidewalk outside my window. The flower in her hair is wet. She stands very still, her eyes focused upward on some object I cannot see. Perhaps she plays the cello, and she is humming Bartok silently, making the bow ripple with her tongue against her teeth. Or maybe she's waiting for a bus to take her to her lover. Or she has read a letter from Paris or Istanbul, and she smells coffee and chestnuts steam roasted. And she hears in the cobbled streets the cries of vendors under the aged curves of bridges. Perhaps she's just a girl, standing in the rain in the early morning by a stone bench while the street shines. It is nothing, you argue, then why do I weep? And why are there splinters in my hands? And why do I stand here long, long after she is gone? Well, about a year after I wrote this poem, I was teaching creative writing at Davidson College. And I got a poem from one of my students that sounded strangely familiar. The title of the poem was "The Scary Man in the Window." Like I do. A little delayed, but you got it. Listen to this. Here it is. I haven't memorized this. The scary man in the window stares at me as I stand on the sidewalk outside in the rain. I am pissed off. This flower in my hair is wet. I cannot sit down on that stone bench because it is also wet. The bus is late, I have cramps, and I'm having a bad hair day. My old tattered slicker lets the rain seep in. Oh God, that man still stares at me. Maybe if I stand still and look away into the sky, he will leave me alone, or if I smile slightly. Just another leering man. If he comes outside, I will scream. Mother calls me cynical. Maybe I am. Perhaps. He is not an ogler at all, but a poet. I like this part. Yeah. Watching my every subtle action, curious like a child, wondering where I'm from and where I'm going, if I have been to Paris or play any instruments, or if I like Kerouac or Bartok or Degas, or if I have a boyfriend somewhere in the city. Or maybe he's just lost his lover and I remind him of her. And he watches me longingly, gripping the window frame as he remembers. It is nothing, you argue. Then why do I stand paralyzed in the rain, quietly suffering his gaze, struck with a bizarre craving for chestnuts and coffee? It's exactly the same form, exactly the same number of lines, it's exactly my poem, but told from a different point of view, and it becomes not only a parody, it starts out as a joke, but then it becomes a wonderful commentary, on my poem. I like to walk around and, usually I have a level, one of those lapel mics, and I just walk around and I forget I can't do that. In 2009, I published New and Selected Poems, which is my best poems from my first 20 years, from 1989 to 2009. Carrot-Colored Words is in here, The Girl in the Yellow Raincoat is in here. What else? Anything else? What else have I read? Small Thing Like a Breath is in here. And I'd like to read one more poem, and then I'm going to end with 3 poems from the new book. This is a poem called Blood Red of Late October in the South. It's from the new poems. And it takes place at Davidson College, and it relates very much to my daughter, whom I told you about just a few minutes ago. Blood red of late October in the South, and from the cemetery to the college campus on the hill, the leaves bathe my eyes. I turn each corner into dazzling surprise. She walks toward me. I show her my favorite tree. I pluck 3 leaves and watch as she carries them away. This is newfound grace, and in the place where sorrow once lay, the small white flower of hope grows. In the South, October lingers. The gold sun glances off the trees. November, with its cold rains, will come soon enough, I know. I take the dazzle inward and down. It courses through my veins and lifts me high, high, into the breathless light. I gotta tell you one thing now. If you buy the book, you'll find the last line is different. The last line is, lofts me toward the breathless light. And I changed it to lifts me high into the breathless light, because I wanted the high and the light. And lift is so much better than loft. And what I love about this is if I memorize the poem and I feel like changing it, I just change it. And so, it's really fun. It's part of the fun of staying with the poems. If words could save us. I've got to read you one fairly long, funny poem, and then I'm going to read you two very short, tender poems. I got really, really, really mad at some people. Look at Janice, she says, Tony Abbott, man. Tony Abbott does have a bad temper, but it only comes out about once every 5 years. And so I found a parable in the New Testament called the Parable of the Great Feast. And in that parable, the host invites all these people to a wonderful party, and they all turn him down because they're too busy. And so he says to his servant, go out in the street and get all the poor people, get all the people that are left and bring them to the party. And so I invited all these important people to one of my readings, and nobody came. And I wrote this poem for them. You're going to love this. It's called House of Cards. so much fun. Once there was a man who gave a party. He invited the top of the deck, the kings and queens, jacks and tens, and of course the aces, those powers behind even the kings themselves. But we all know it's the queens who run the show. The point is, none of them came. That's right, none of them. The kings were busy in the walled city, in the compound, deconstructing their missiles, and the queens were always moaning about how overcommitted they were. The queens were sad, but busy or sad, it was still a no. And the jacks were cooking up stuff, making plans, hatching the eggs of desire and circumlocution. They were, you might say, moving. And the tens were so insecure, they just sat there polishing their little hearts or spades. They wanted to look good for the queens. They wanted to move up, get a face, one of those cool one-eyed jack poses. So, who was this guy anyway? A 9 at best. But the guy, as I understand the story, was, well, I know this comes as some surprise. God! God! Yeah. He just looked like a 9. He was really mad. And he told his servants, the 8s, to go out in the town where all the new subdivisions were and find some 7s and 6s, and then go down to affordable housing and the bus station and the Walmart for some 3s and 4s. Most of all, God said, invite the 2s. By God, God laughed. Those 2s are the best. And don't forget the 5s. The 5s might need a little extra persuading, those skeptical 5s. And there was all those beautiful low numbers crowding around the pool out back, drinking beer and eating chips and salsa, some of the 3s and 6s mixing it up, the 7s and 4s playing drums and guitars, the 5s singing chorus, and the 2s, God bless the 2s, they were, if you haven't guessed it, the lovers. The 2s always came in sets. God liked the hearts of diamonds best, but he loved them all. And then at the witching hour, or whatever hour you like, God told some stories and started crying and wiping his eyes because he was so happy to have them all there. And as for the royalty, and those slick behind-the-scenes aces, well, there would be some wailing and gnashing of teeth, just like the good book says. That's what I heard from those who were there. 2 2s told me so. Okay. I'm gonna end with the title poem, If Words Could Save Us, from my new book. By the way, the book has a CD, and if you would like to hear me reading, you get the CD as part of the book, which is a wonderful bargain. So please do go get books afterwards. If words could save us. If words could save us, and they can, my darling, I would whisper in the chambers of your ears, every wistful sound, like the warbling of the wood thrush, until even the small boys whose voices are like angels would cry for more, and you would sigh like the sun setting behind the ocean floor. If touch could save us, and it does, my dove, I would take the wounds of time and touch them all until the soul shines with the light of God in the newness of now. Healing is the only language of love, my lamb. And wherever we have touched, the tree that grows there will be blessed, my bliss. And the fruit of that tree will be life, my love. The fruit of that tree will be life. Thank you.
First sentence of my introduction for Dr. Fuller, a second reader tonight, started with, "Hello everyone, and thank you for coming." So thank you for being here, and thank you for this time. It's my pleasure to introduce to you tonight Dr. Janice Fuller, a very dedicated English professor here at Catawba, and a very dear friend of mine. The same dedication and zeal she puts into her teaching, and she puts into the time with her students and caring for her students, that same zeal goes to her writing, and you can tell. Our students love her because she helps us befriend what we're reading to really form a relationship with what we're writing. She forges a connection between the student and the subject that is nothing short of authentically human, and I would say the same for her work, is nothing short of authentically human. Last summer, I was able to serve as an intern at the Center for Faith in the Arts, a nonprofit organization whose creed is to connect people through art to their spiritual life, to spirituality. One of my major duties as an intern was to create a database inventory of the entire small library that they have there, so I spent a lot of time with books. As you can imagine, while making each of these entries, I may have lingered on a couple books here and there. Some I had seen before, Lovers of the Past, and some newbies. Sometimes I would go past the copyright information. All I really needed to know was the copyright date and the author. But I'd go further. I'd look at a couple of the poems. I'd just spend time with the books. I ogled over the complete works of Robert Frost. I gawked at the Tennyson anthology. But one day I came across a book entitled Archaeology is a Destructive Science. And under it I read Janice Fuller. For this poetry book, a glance went and cut it. And if my boss was here, she'd kill me. But I took it for a little field trip. I had a lot of laundry that day, and I took it to a laundromat here in town. And while I was there, a thunderstorm came through, and I pretended like it was a major inconvenience. But I just spent 2 hours with the book, 2 hours with Dr. Fuller's words. And I've always thought that poetry was the most intimate conversation you could ever have with a stranger. But what if it's no stranger at all? What if you know exactly the dedication and zeal and love that someone puts into their writing? What if every day you are a witness to her artistry, to her genius, to her love for the work every time you stepped in the classroom? I call that more spiritual than anything Professor of English at Catawba College, where she has taught for 31 years. She has published 3 poetry books, Archaeology is a Destructive Science, Sex Education, and Seance, winner of the Poetry Council of North Carolina's Oscar Arnold Young Award, which won the North Carolina Poetry Book of the Year. Her poems have appeared in numerous magazines and anthologies, including Magma of London, New Welsh Review, Asheville Poetry Review, Poems and Plays, Cave Wall, and Comstock Review. Her plays and libretti have been produced at Catawba's Florence, Bucks Victoria, and Hedrick Theaters, Barebones Theater New Play Festival, the Minneapolis Fringe Festival, and France's Rendezvous Musique Nouvelle, sorry for butchering. In the fall of 2011, Catawba professor Beth Holman directed Fuller's Abbott adaptation of Faulkner's As I Lay Dying. Educated at Duke University, UNC Greensboro, she has been a fellow at artist colonies in Ireland, Scotland, Spain, and Portugal. She regularly teaches at Wild Acres Writers Workshop and at excuse me for this pronunciation, T.D. Millwith, the National Writing School in Wales. Please join me in welcoming no stranger at all, Catawba's own Dr. Janice Fuller.
If I could describe heaven, it would be being perpetually spring in the month of poems, being with great friends and colleagues, being introduced by a fabulous student, being surrounded by the most wonderful students. Can you hear? Is this loud enough? Is this okay? By the most wonderful students in the world, and having a chance to make a connection between Anthony Abbott and one of the honorable mentions for the Anthony Abbott contest. Out of 65 people in the state, Lizzle Grace Davis was one of 6 honorable mentions. So Anthony Abbott, meet Lizzle Grace Davis. And all of you wonderful readers and writers of poetry, welcome. I'm so very happy to be here with you. I will start out with a couple poems from Sex Education. I won't read, I thought about reading the sex poems, but I wasn't sure who would be here, and so instead I'm not going to read those so much. I am going to read a couple of family poems. One of them is called, My Aunt Raises Violets from Africa. This is a poem that Garrison Keillor selected for Writer's Almanac and recorded it on his program. And I was excited. I drove to Knoxville because we don't get the program here to be able to hear it. And I wondered if he would say aunt or aunt. And to his credit, he said aunt. I was quite impressed. In the South, there is a phenomenon often of women who never marry, and they stay and take care of their mothers and live their whole lives with their mothers. I had an aunt who is still alive, who lives in Salisbury Gardens, and this is about her. She was afraid to travel, enough said. And so this is My Aunt Raises Violets from Africa. All those loose threads from her sewing, trailing off bobbins toward Chattanooga, Nashville, Myrtle Beach, Niagara Falls. She snapped them at the hem with her teeth, those worn stitching posts. She never learned to drive. Didn't leave Grandma's yard for 30 years. Her singer just hummed. She never stopped wearing that engagement ring he gave her at 20, measuring time by how deep it sank into the finger. Even after he died, her fiancé, an old man still living with his mother, he only whispered his name. At night, after the Bible verses, she'd coat herself with vapor rub, thick and Vicks blue, then dial up the DJ who knew her voice, yearning for the smooth of Engelbert, soothing her into bed, back to back with Grandma. When I spent the night, we'd tend the violets, lined like bassinets along the north. Double lavenders, crystal stars, angel blues, pink persuasion. So careful. We never touch their velvet, not even their undersides. We just turn them each day, their faces straining toward the sun. The next poem is one I always read, and it's one that I read under Tony's tutelage. It's called My Mother's 70th Birthday. I thought, I can't read that. There will be people who've heard me. My daughter and I debated on the phone. I always call her. She's always thought she wasn't the poetry person, yet she's the one who's sort of my little agent on the road. And I said, I always read that poem. She said, you always read that poem. You got to read it. No, I always read that poem. No, you always read that poem. So I thought, okay, I will read that poem. It sort of evokes my mother as my muse. The story of this is my mother had emphysema and aneurysm, one of which eventually burst. She spent the last 5 years of her life on oxygen. After she died, one day I was in class teaching poetry, and I said, okay, let's write today. It's September 15th, and I calculated and realized my mother would have been 70 that day if she had lived. And so I decided to have a birthday party for her. My mother's 70th birthday. When I call her from the grave, she lifts herself, peels away each tatter of her pink nightgown. Her belly still sags into a smile. The arm flesh flaps. It always did. I offer her a blue flannel robe, sleeves wide enough for oxygen tubes. She eases back into her old, rough-wheeled chair. Her skin is thinner now. I ask, what's inside the hill? She answers, a long, gentle blade. Please don't take my picture. These windows make the grass grow backwards. Together, we pull the knife like a snowplow through the store-bought froth. More sugar and air than cake. Only a small piece for me, she protests, dragging her finger along the path left by the ghost slice. She crooks the frosting into her mouth, sucking loud, as always. But the candles, she can't keep from smiling at the candles. I still can't get my breath, she says. You blow them out. Poetry does save us, and I think that's one of the lessons from Tony is that I recycle my mother's death, I recycle some other sadnesses, and yet I've kept myself afloat, and sometimes kept my children afloat by writing poems and realizing how they can save us. I'm gonna drink some water. My tooth, I'm kind of hoarse, and my tooth, can you hear me, Betsy? Yes, straining a little bit. The next book is called Seance, and in it I have some poems that are written in forms, and I'll start with one that's called Ex-Lover. A couple of the poems in this are using the form called the Minute that the poet laureate of Arkansas invented a while back. Kathy Smith Bowers, our poet laureate, kind of made it famous. I won't bore you too much with this except to say each section it's a poem that has actually 60 syllables, and it's divided into 3 stanzas with rhyming couplets. It has long, short, and now you should forget all about that. But this is a poem in 2 parts, and each one of those is a minute. And it's about, as you may be, the end of a relationship. Ex-lover, 1. Sharpen the art sabotage. I plot revenge. Something as real as his betrayal. Electronics. I'll electrocute him in the back, zapping back a eureka of energy, magnetic, kinetic, drained from me night after night, email after email. 2. He soaked the formaldehyde up. Skins developed quite a pumpernickel pucker. Skins developed quite a pumpernickel pucker. Let me start this section again. 2. He soaked the formaldehyde up. Skins developed quite a pumpernickel pucker. Turn sideways, now inside the glass beaker. Mustached dissipation, almost motion. For me in my lab coat, he's just a sample. Last week's specimen, nameless, floating. And I would say with this, along with your cards poem, revenge is sweet, don't piss off the poet. Don't piss off the poet. We can love and keep ourselves alive, but we can also exact revenge. I have a couple poems in this section about traveling, especially ones about traveling with students. This particular poem is about snorkeling in the Galapagos. And nobody's around now that went on that trip, but there are people who've snorkeled with me, and I would point out one, Susie Williams, who actually saved me from drowning on the Jamaica trip last year. So this poem is for you, Susie. It's called Minutes in the Galapagos, and it's several minutes from together. The lava too hot for walking. We're snorkeling, ocean silent, our breath tubes bent into questions with no answers. Rays, gold dancers gesture as one. Deaf, the sea hums this refrain. Drowning is easy. Rest. Stay lazy. No need to steer towards such wonder. No need to steer towards such wonder. Bubbles under gaze. Sea lions making quick turns toward mammal features. Nose to mask. Who dares to ask, human or not? Dini's a dot, almost too far for us to reach. Each fin to each, an answer. Death sneaks in as breath. You weren't on that trip, Susie. I needed you. I really did. I got so far away that I thought the currents are very Humboldt was very strong there. Terrible swimmer. And there was a moment where I thought, okay, just dead man's float. Maybe you can make it. And obviously I did. I took a group of students recently to Ireland, and I'm going to read. I have lots and lots and lots of poems about Ireland, but there's one that I'll read because it's set. I had done a residency in the Tyrone Guthrie Center, up almost in the border between the Republic of Ireland and the north, in a county called Monaghan. It's an artist residency, and while I was there was a textile artist, and she and I always planned to get back together and collaborate. We haven't. But what she was working on then was she was taking felt and going into classrooms where there would be Protestant children and Catholic children, and they would make squares that she would join into quilts. County Monaghan, near the border. My friend from the north gathers children, Protestant, Catholic, to make felt squares, swirling bits of colored wool into patterns on plastic. Lamb hooves shrouded in clouds, red heart cracked against brown. She sprays each child's square with suds, rolls, agitates, leaves it to dry on its own, the split strands tangling, meshing at a distance. And after, she'll stitch them. Dark, then pastel, pain next to joy, aggression, admission, quilting fragments into story. Pink dress tilting in a burgundy field, black kite dragging its tail across yellow. Squares into panels, panels into jackets. Two of them, side by side along a whitewashed wall, their empty sleeves holding hands. Okay, finished with the older poems. Now I'm going to do some newer poems. One of the best things that has happened to me this year is that I got to collaborate with a fabulous photographer who happens to be right back there by the sound booth. He and I went together over to a nursing home, Lutheran Home Center in Winston-Salem. Many of the patients had been indigent or severely disabled, and many of them would not be able to be moved to another facility. It had been a private facility for a long time. It was so dilapidated. The care was really not very good. The facility was beyond almost hope. But the Lutheran Services for the Aging went in, bought the facility, and fixed it up. The people cared so much, and they're actually building a new facility that Sean and I will take our and photographs of it when it opens. But we went and talked and eventually had 16 patients that Sean took photographs of and that I wrote poems about. We interviewed them, and it was a great kind of collaboration. I love to write about photographs, but this was different in that normally when I write about photographs, I'm free to make up whatever I want. This was much more documentary in a way. I felt this real allegiance to be true and authentic and honest to these people and what they said. So a lot of it's words and descriptions. And now I need to, this is going to take a second. I want you to see the 3 photographs. The poems are very short, but I want you to see the 3 photographs as I read about them. Yeah, I think if you'll be better with that. The name of the photographer is Sean Myers. He's right back there. Sean, please stand up. He's the one who was here. He was upstaged earlier by his gorgeous baby Emmeline, but she's gone now, so we can notice him. It was a great pleasure, and he's, as you can see, can everybody see that okay? See this one? This man's name is JJ, and the poem consists completely of what JJ said to me. I had pages, but then I cobbled it into this. JJ. Winston-Salem's a dangerous place. Lightning surging from a power pole. Took me days to overcome the electric shock, the disoriented time. I'm always getting hit by special weapons. M1 rifle near Munich, accidents in the night, hand grenades, shrapnel in my heart. I put sulfur on wounds. It burns a little. I'm addicted to Pepsi, Coke, chewing tobacco. Gave up alcohol. I'm investigating what's safe and what's not. Next, a woman named Lucille. Sorry. This is what chairs of departments are good for. They're lackeys and servants. This is Lucille. It's a combination of description and some of her words. In the sunroom corner, she slips back toward the bright air. The pale tubes can't bring her. I might get a body perm. Her fingers are perfect orchids. So many pretty colors in our beauty shop. So hard to choose. Your shirt makes your eyes so blue, we tell her. But maybe it's the sky widening over her shoulder. And then finally, the poems are shorter than your visits. They don't quite live up to the photographs in that way.
Sideways, Gordon. Yeah. Yes, he's laying down.
Sean, he's lying down. Is that right, Sean?
Mm.
Okay. I can't see it. I'll let you process that. This is a man named Lex. Lex did not ever speak. But finally, at one point, after many visits, we tried to talk to him. He wouldn't say anything. At one point, he waved at Sean, which was something we remembered very much. I didn't know, since there's no language, I was free in a way to imagine where he might be inside his head. The thing that gave me a point of entry for him was one of the nurses said, when I was pregnant, I think he thought I was his mother. Lex. He waits in the crater. Late night stars. Here it is safe. If he can float on his back, float on his side. Behind him, the smallest wave rocks and subsides. This space is just wide enough for him. Thank you to Sean. Thank you very much. Will that be you won't care if that stays up there, will you? I have another set of poems. I have a new manuscript that is my friend Allison Elrod, Tyler Elrod's mother, you may know Tyler, has been helping me edit the book. And the book ended up being called On the Bevel. It was called that because during the time that I was working on these poems, I was writing and rewriting the play, the adaptation of the play that was William Faulkner's As I Lay Dying. Another very good friend of mine, Beth Homan, who just happens to be the mother of that gorgeous baby, Emmeline, and has some connection with the photographer, Sean. She was the director, and we had collaborated and spent a very long time. So I was living in this world of Faulkner, and As I Lay Dying, and the mother needing to be buried, and the son, Cash, building the coffin, and all that. And so when I brought the manuscript to Allison to begin with, and we were looking at it, she read through, she said, okay, you're going to be allowed 2 coffins and 3 dead mothers. That's it. No, I can't, and I think I have more than that, but I did have to cut back on some coffins and on some dead mothers. Dead mothers, one dead mother is all through my poetry, but coffins and the body and what happens to the body, I just was everywhere for me. So this is one of the poems from that. It has a Cash in the reason the book is called On the Bevel. There's a monologue where Cash explains why he can't be hurried in making the coffin, that he has to make it on the bevel and it's got to be perfect. And this is a poem that relates to that. Jesse Syack, who is here, did the role of Darl in it, and it was, as I'll come back to in a minute, it was a high point for me. But it was just what I lived under. And so this is a poem that really is getting at whether, I think someone might have asked the I in this poem, well, why not be cremated? And the I answered. The poem is called Ars Exactica, not Ars, not A-R-S-C, but Ars Exactica. Some poets write poems called Ars Poetica, which is, here's my poetic, here's why I write. This is the art of dying in a certain way, or being dealt with after death, I think, Ars Exactica. I won't be burned to ashes that flutter and settle in whatever basin appears. I want to fit like a puzzle piece, snapped into place. The jigsaw's curves and lurches so perfect, nothing else will go there. Let the shovel be as clean as the saw. Let it follow the dotted lines the puzzle maker drew. Not God, just the guy who buys his tools at Lowe's and smiles when his bevel is sharp. That maker. The artisan who says, here, and here, and turns away from the lathe, ready for another job. This is another poem that's part of that book. It's a poem that links to another play that has just been produced at Catawba. We just did the Laramie Project 10 years later. Matthew Shepard, who's the subject of the poem, went to Catawba, was a student here, and he and I were very close. His longtime partner, who survived him, he and I stayed very close and are still very, very close. And this is a poem for Lewis, the partner, who survived Matt, but also Matt. The strangest thing about this is that when they did the first read-through of the play, Jim Epperson asked me to come and talk to the cast about Matt. And I talked about Lewis some too. I had sent this poem out about a year earlier, and sometimes poems you think, they're never going to come back, what's happened to them? The night I got home from that read-through, there was an email from the editor of Catawba magazine in Gainesville, Florida, saying they had accepted the poem. It's in 3 parts, and in some ways, if you've seen the Laramie Project 10 years later, the last monologue is a friend who is talking about there was Matthew Shepard, and then there was Matt. And I think that was something I always felt for his longtime partner, Lewis, was, what about your Matt? It's called Relics of the Martyr for Lewis and Matt. 1, barbed wire in Wyoming. You sleep with your arms around Mickey, the mouse, your back to the wall, so nothing can creep from behind. Only the boy you loved can come to you, young but bludgeoned, his laugh still clear, a shock of blonde shielding his eye. 2, first-person expansion. I might call it first-person colonialism, I don't know. First-person expansion. Watch out for pronouns. Strangers colonize with we. On the TV, we have occupied your grief, leaving nothing but scraps in a book, a cup of rocky soil, a cigar box full of bones. 3. Spring. The fingers of the dead stop growing. Only hair and nails still grow. When you cut the grass low, look for them, sprouting like crocuses from the earth. I'm going to give you the 3-poem warning. I think this goes on. How much longer is this going to go on? So 3 more poems. This is a poem that hasn't so far found its way into On the Bevel. I don't know if it quite fits or not, but it's when I was, the opening night for As I Lay Dying, I went to talk to the cast in the green room. We're actually on stage. It was a part of the green room. And I said, except for the birth of my daughters, this is the greatest day of my life. And I went later and told one of my twin daughters, and she said, what about my wedding? Oh, yeah. I mean, it was my favorite after the birth and after your wedding. It was like my 3rd favorite day. But, in fact, the wedding was a miraculous event for a lot of different reasons. And a little back, a lot of you, I talk incessantly about my twins. So many of you know all about them, but I'll give you a little background. One of them is very conventional, loves girly things, like weddings, like big weddings. The other one has always been, they're twins, the other one has been very political, punk, spikes, things like that. So about 10 years ago, the daughter that was the alternative, by the way, now is in medical school, she came home and she said, look, and she pulled up her sleeve, and she had a full sleeve and tattoo. Her sister went, oh my God, now my bridesmaids are going to have to wear long sleeve dresses. Allison responded by saying, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I was living my life toward your wedding. But in fact, of course, she was. And that was looming. There was this thing of, oh God, Megan has a serious relationship, we're heading toward the wedding, what will happen? And actually there was a compromise. The bridesmaids wore strapless dresses, and Allison had a little jacket where most of her many tattoos were covered. The other thing was I had gone through a fairly difficult divorce, and you always wonder, will we get along? How will we be together? And this miracle occurred where we all were so happy and so connected and so joyful. And Sean Myers took the photographs, and so if you want to see how joyful, go to his website, photogator.com, and there you'll see even still some of these wonderful images. This has 5 little parts. They're not so long. Mother of the bride, 1. The flame rose up between them, hovered the edge of her veil, pewter sash, angling across pearl and net and sequins, barely glancing the floor. All she had done in 30 years trailed behind her. Pirouettes on the balance beam, rodeos for my little ponies, diving blind into a Carolina sky. Even when we bustled the long train beneath her, her sheath was thin and light. 2. A light is on in the hall. The empty place beside me on the bed is crumpled from her fretful sleep. The days before the wedding, the moon slipped through the 3 high windows, crept across us while we slept. 3. When I wobbled my first bike all the way down Claiborne Street, I pedaled only once. Gravity took me most of the way. That and one hard push from a father who wanted to teach me a lesson. At the depot, which is where the reception took place, she danced the long song with her father, his black coat a setting, holding her close as a pearl. Once, in a hospital gown, he curved her across his chest, her newborn thumb tucked in her mouth, a swath of gown around her. He would let her sleep there forever, if he could. 4. If you believe in angels, her twin was one, always waiting in a plastic bassinet down the hall. The wedding day, she was the honor guard, hovering in palest mauve, her white roses holding their petals tight, a tattoo star poking from her neckline like a dagger. Sweet words glaze the page like syrup. How can I say how small and perfect she was? How the train whistle, the silver urns, the disco balls dotted lights, the mothers, chiffoned and teal and pink, spun around her like candy floss that melts in the air if you touch. Two more poems. My family's from Rowan County. If you've been to Hendricks Brothers Barbecue, I was not a Hendricks, but my Aunt Emily married Wilburn Hendricks of Wilburn, Ovid, and Homer. Two had classical names. My uncle was Wilburn. And they started Hendricks Brothers Barbecue. So as I was growing up, I would spend time out on Hendricks School Road, on Pearly School Road, and turn on the Hendricks Road, and there was Hendricks Pond. Insomnia. West of here along a road, once dirt, a catfish lurks and turns at the bottom of Hendricks Pond, its heavy, bony head just listening. No one dips a line in the water anymore. A yard flecked with four-leaf clovers tumbles toward the bank. No mower, not even a swing scythe to thwart its growth. Aunt Emily's old wisteria wraps the post of the swing set, rust settling into the crossbar where my cousin would hang upside down, her long rush of hair brushing against the weeds that sprouted around us. Her cheeks flushed with blood, her upside-down smile saying, we should forage for toads and worms, to thread on a hook and fling into the shadow. Nothing was urgent then. A thin layer of leisure wrapped the yard like the soft sheet Mother covered me with on nights so hot we trusted the undulating screen to let in the breeze, to keep out what churned in the dark. And the final poem, which dates me so very much, and it just appeared in the Arrowhead, it's called, well, I won't tell you the name yet because that gives it away. I was in the 60s, right on the cusp of really radical kind of politics. There was a mild sense of changing the world through the folk movement. I was in a band at that point, 5 girls in Cincinnati, and we had the unfortunate name, the Teardrops. Who the hell came up with that name? We were the Teardrops. We did, in fact, though, win the Greater Cincinnati Talent Show, I don't know how, in little red vests and skirts on the Queen something or other paddle boat. And so, they were going to have a reunion 40 years later. I didn't go, but it caused me to reflect on it. Teardrops, the folk band, 40 years on. We've strummed simple chords, no fancy fingering, shunning syncopation, a stroke on every beat. We played Dylan, Joan Baez, Peter, Paul, and Mary. Our signature song, When I'm Dead and Buried, Don't You Weep After Me. Tragic 13-year-old girls harmonizing about loss. In 9th grade, Alyssa's father tumbled to his death on the basement stairs. She was the only one of us who knew how to use a capo, the only one who could play a bass line. Until then, Puff the Magic Dragon's silence when Jackie Paper came no more was as bereft as any of us could feel. The end of every folk song is the tonic, the return home, nostos, as the Greeks call it. Telemachus resuming his duties, Argos thumping his tail, Odysseus finding Penelope waiting